The first thing Ethan Miller heard that morning wasn't the birds. It was a fist hammering his workshop door hard enough to rattle the glass. He opened it and found his neighbor Claire standing in the cold, a packed bag in one hand and tears she refused to let fall in the other. "I need to leave town for a few days," she said, "and I need you to not ask me why." What Ethan didn't know was that 3 counties over a black SUV was already backing out of a driveway, and the man behind the wheel had a talent for finding people who didn't want to be found. If you're watching, tell me what city you're from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. The fist came again before Ethan even had the door all the way open. "Ethan, please." He'd known Claire Bennett for a little over a year, and in all that time, he'd never once seen her raise her voice, never seen her stand anywhere without first checking who might be watching. Now, she was on his porch at 7:10 in the morning, hair pushed back with a hand that wouldn't stay still, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder like she'd grabbed the first thing she could reach. "Come in," he said. "You're shaking." "I'm not coming in. If I come in, I'll sit down, and if I sit down, I'll talk myself out of it." She looked past him into the workshop at the half-finished dresser on the sawhorses and the coffee going cold on the bench. "You said something a couple weeks ago. You said you were driving up to your family's cabin this weekend." "I did." "Is the offer still good?" Ethan set down the mug he'd forgotten he was holding. "Claire, I said that as a joke. I said you should come with me sometime. I wasn't—" "I know what you said." Her voice cracked, then steadied, and something in the way she forced it back into line told him more than any explanation could have. "I know it was a joke. I'm asking you to make it real." He'd been a father long enough to know the difference between a person who wanted something and a person who was drowning. Claire had the look of the second one. He'd seen it in the mirror himself years ago, in the months after his wife died, when the world kept turning and expecting him to turn with it. "Give me a reason," he said quietly. "One reason. Then I'll say yes." For a second she didn't answer. Then she pulled the sleeve of her sweater down over her wrist, a small motion, almost nothing, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching. But Ethan was watching. He'd been watching her for a year in the way a man watches something he's told himself he's not allowed to want. Because for the first time in 3 years, she said, "I want to do something that nobody gave me permission to do. And if I stand here another 5 minutes, I'm going to lose the nerve." Ethan reached for his keys off the hook by the door. "Give me 30 minutes, he said. "I have to drop Lily at my sister's." Claire let out a breath that seemed to take half her body weight with it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He almost smiled. "You haven't seen my truck's heater." 6-year-old Lily Miller had opinions about most things, and she shared them all on the drive to her aunt's. "Is Miss Claire coming with us?" "Because she smells like bread and Aunt Denise smells like the medicine cabinet." "Miss Claire is coming with me, buddy. You're going to have a sleepover at Aunt Denise's." "Why can't I come?" Ethan glanced at his daughter in the rear view. She had her mother's stubborn chin and her mother's way of asking the exact question you didn't want to answer. "Because grown-ups sometimes need a couple days that are just quiet, that's all." "Is Miss Claire sad?" The question landed harder than it should have. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "What makes you say that?" "She was sad at the mailbox last week." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. Lily shrugged, 6 years old and already reading people better than most adults he knew. "You do that too, when you talk about Mommy." Ethan didn't say anything for a while. Then, "You're a smart kid, you know that." "I know," Lily said, satisfied, and went back to looking out the window. His sister Denise met them at her door with a coffee in one hand and a look on her face that Ethan had been dodging his whole life. "So," she said once Lily had run past her toward the television, "the neighbor." "It's not what you're thinking." "I'm not thinking anything." Denise leaned against the doorframe. "I'm thinking my brother, who hasn't taken a weekend for himself in 4 years, is driving a married and all but paper woman up to Dad's old cabin. But I'm not thinking anything. She's not married. She's got a boyfriend, Ryan Cole. Everybody in town knows Ryan Cole. Denise's voice changed on the name, and Ethan noticed. He put up half the money for the new fire station, shook every hand at the 4th of July. Real charmer. You don't like him. I've never spoken 10 words to him. She took a sip of coffee. But I've watched how she gets when he's around. She gets small, Ethan, like she's trying to take up less air. Denise set the mug down on the little table by the door. You be careful. Not for you, for her. A man like that doesn't lose things quietly. Ethan wanted to tell her she was jumping to conclusions. He wanted to say it was 2 friends and a fishing rod, and a weekend, nothing more. But he thought about the way Claire had pulled her sleeve over her wrist, and the words dried up in his throat. I'll have my phone, he said instead. You'd better. Tiens. Claire was waiting on her own porch when he pulled back into the road, the bag at her feet like she was afraid to let it go. She climbed into the truck fast, the way a person moves when they're worried a door might close. You changed your mind 3 times waiting for me, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. 4. She almost laughed. I'm still not sure I haven't. He pulled out onto the county road, and for the first few miles, neither of them spoke. The heater rattled and complained and finally coughed out something almost warm. Claire kept her eyes forward, both hands in her lap, and Ethan let her have the silence because he understood it. Some silences aren't empty. Some silences are the sound of a person deciding whether they can trust the quiet. It was Claire who broke it. Does he know? Does who know what? Does anyone know where you're going? Your sister. My sister knows I'm at the cabin. That's all she knows. Ethan glanced at her. Why? No reason. She said it too fast, then softer. I didn't tell Ryan I was leaving. Ethan kept his voice even. You don't owe me the story, but if there's something I need to know before I drive us 2 hours into the mountains, now's the time. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she started to talk, and once she started, it was like something had come loose that had been holding for years. When I met him, I thought he was the safest thing that ever happened to me. She watched the trees go by. I'd had a rough couple of years. Bad job, worse apartment, a father who drank himself into the ground and left me the bill. And here comes Ryan Cole. Steady. Successful. He looked at me like I was a problem he could solve, and God help me, I wanted to be solved. That's not a crime, Claire. No. But here's the thing nobody tells you. She turned to look at him. A man who wants to fix you needs you to stay broken, because the day you're whole, he's out of a job. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Did he hurt you? Not the way you mean. She said it carefully, like she'd rehearsed the answer for people who asked exactly that. He never hit me. He'd tell you that himself, real proud. I never laid a hand on her. Like that's the whole test. Like there aren't 100 ways to take a person apart without leaving a mark. Such as. Claire counted them off, and her voice got flatter with each one, the way a voice does when it's protecting itself. Such as I used to write. Short stories, some poetry. I was good. I'd sold a couple of pieces before I met him. First month we were together, he read one and said, "This is cute. But you know, real writers actually make money, right?" And he laughed. And I laughed too, because I didn't want to be the girl who couldn't take a joke. She swallowed. I haven't written a word in 2 years. Claire, such as I had friends. Amy from my old job. Ryan didn't like her, said she was a bad influence, said she was jealous of us. So little by little the dinners stopped, and the calls stopped, and one day I realized the only person I really talked to anymore was him. She let out a shaky breath. Such as I have a checking account he has the login to. For safety, he said, in case anything happened to me. And now I can't buy a cup of coffee without a text at 6 o'clock asking me what the $4 was for. Ethan's hands had gone tight on the wheel. He made himself loosen them. I'm telling you all this, Claire went on, so you understand something. When I knocked on your door this morning, I wasn't running to you. I need you to know that. I wasn't trading one man's roof for another. I know that. Do you? She looked at him, and there was something almost fierce in it. Because that's the story he'll tell. If he finds out, he'll say I ran off with the neighbor. He'll make it dirty and simple because dirty and simple is easier for people to believe than the truth. And what's the truth? Claire faced forward again. The mountains were rising up ahead of them now, blue and folded against the sky. The truth is, I woke up this morning and I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision that was only mine, not ours, not his, mine. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And I thought if I don't do one selfish thing before I die, I'm going to disappear completely, and nobody's even going to notice because there won't be enough of me left to miss. Ethan drove for a minute without answering. Then he said, "You want to know the last selfish thing I did? Tell me. After Sarah passed, everybody had a plan for me. Move closer to family, sell the shop, get a real job with benefits, something stable for Lily. My mother-in-law wanted to take her for a year, just till you're back on your feet," she said. He shook his head. And one night, I sat in that workshop at 2 a.m. and I thought, no, this is mine. My kid is mine. My work is mine. My grief is mine, and I'll carry it my own way, and none of you get a vote. He glanced at her. Everybody told me it was selfish. Maybe it was. It's also the reason I'm still standing. Claire was quiet, then very softly. How long did it take to feel like a person again? I'll let you know when I get there. She laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of her, and Ethan felt the truck get a little lighter, the way a room does when someone finally opens a window. They stopped once at a gas station near the state line, and the small ordinary drama of it seemed to steady her. Claire went inside to use the restroom while Ethan pumped the gas, and when she came back out she was carrying 2 coffees and a bag of the terrible powdered donuts that every gas station in America has sold since the beginning of time. "I bought these with my own money," she announced, and there was something almost giddy in it. "Cash, that I had in my pocket. Nobody's going to text me about it." Bold move. Reckless even. She handed him a coffee and climbed back in, and for a moment she just held the donuts in her lap and looked at them like they were something more than fried dough and sugar. "It's stupid. It's $4 of gas station donuts, but I feel like I robbed a bank." Ethan pulled back onto the highway. "That's not stupid. It's a little stupid. You know what my grandfather used to say?" He took a sip of the coffee, which was scalding and burnt and perfect. He came up during the Depression, had nothing. And he used to say a man isn't free because of what he owns. A man's free because of what he can walk away from. Ethan set the cup back in the holder. "You just walked away from something, Claire. Doesn't matter that it's $4 of donuts. What matters is, you decided and nobody stopped you." Claire didn't say anything for a while. When Ethan glanced over, she was crying quietly, without any drama tears just running down and dropping off her chin onto the donut bag. But she was smiling too. "Sorry," she said, wiping her face. "It's been a long time since anybody talked to me like I was somebody who could decide things." "Get used to it." What Ethan didn't know, what neither of them knew, as the truck climbed higher into the mountains and the phone signal thinned out to a single bar, and then to nothing, was that Ryan Cole had woken up that same morning to a house that was too quiet. He'd noticed the missing bag first, then the missing toothbrush, then in the bathroom trash the receipt he hadn't authorized, a bus schedule she'd printed at the library that she'd thrown away and thought no more about. Ryan Cole was a careful man. He noticed things. He'd built his whole life on noticing things about people and using what he noticed. He didn't panic. Men like Ryan don't panic. He made himself a cup of coffee, and he sat down at the kitchen table, and he opened his laptop, and he logged into the account he'd set up for her safety 2 years ago. The one he'd insisted they share, the one she'd forgotten had a location feature tied to the card. The one that had pinged a gas station near the South Carolina line at 8:40 that morning. He looked at that little dot on the map for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and he stood up and he took the keys to the black SUV off the hook by the door. He wasn't angry. That was the thing people got wrong about Ryan Cole. He didn't get angry, not on the outside. On the outside, he stayed calm and reasonable, and just a little bit sad because that was the version of himself that always won. But somewhere under the calm, a decision had already been made. Claire Bennett had left before. Small things, a night at a friend's, a walk that went too long. and every time she'd come back. She always came back because he'd made sure over 3 careful years that she had nowhere else to be. This time, she'd found somewhere else to be. And Ryan Cole did not lose things quietly. Back in the truck, Claire had fallen asleep somewhere around the last long climb, her head against the window, the donut bag empty in her lap. Ethan turned the heater down so it wouldn't wake her, and drove the last 20 minutes in a silence that felt for the first time in a long time like peace instead of loneliness. He thought about Denise's warning. A man like that doesn't lose things quietly. He thought about the sleeve Claire had pulled down over her wrist, and the checking account, and the 2 years without a written word. He thought about how easy it would have been to say no this morning to protect his quiet life and his careful routines, to tell himself it wasn't his business, his. Wood was easier to fix than people. He'd built his whole life on that idea. You couldn't heal a heart with sandpaper and wood glue. You couldn't clamp a broken person and wait for them to set. So he'd stayed in his shop and stayed in his grief and kept the world at arm's length and told himself he was doing fine. And then a woman had knocked on his door at 7:10 with a canvas bag and a look he recognized from his own mirror, and asked him to make a joke real. And he'd said yes. And now here they were, climbing into the mountains, and Ethan Miller understood with the sudden clarity of a man who has spent years lying to himself that he had wanted to say yes for a very long time. That scared him more than anything, because he knew how this could go. He knew the story wrote itself: the lonely widower and the woman escaping a bad man, 2 hurt people crashing into each other because the crash felt better than the ache. He'd seen it a dozen times. It always started like rescue and ended like wreckage, because you can't build something whole out of 2 people who are only running. And Ethan didn't want to be Claire's next hiding place. He'd sooner turn the truck around. But he also knew, and this was the thing he couldn't say to her yet, couldn't say to himself out loud, that in the year he'd known her, the best part of every single day had been the 2 minutes at the mailbox. That the loaf of bread she'd brought over that first winter was still the kindest thing anyone had done for him since Sarah died. That when Lily said Miss Claire smiled, but her eyes didn't, some part of him had wanted to walk across the road and knock down every door between that woman and whatever was dimming her. He hadn't. Because it wasn't his business. Because he had a daughter and a shop and a careful life. He wasn't sure anymore if that made him a good man, or just a coward with good manners. The cabin came into view through the trees. His father's cabin, his grandfather's. Before that, the place where 3 generations of Miller men had come to remember who they were. Ethan slowed the truck and eased it up the gravel drive, and beside him, Claire stirred and opened her eyes, and for one long moment, before she remembered where she was and why her face was completely unguarded. Young, rested. The way she must have looked before she ever met a man who counted her coffee money. "We're here," Ethan said. Claire sat up and looked out at the lake, wide and silver and endless, through the pines, and Ethan watched something move across her face that he didn't have a word for. Something between grief and relief. Something like a person setting down a weight they'd carried so long they'd forgotten it wasn't part of their body. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's quiet," Ethan said. "Nobody comes up here. No signal past the ridge. No neighbors for 2 miles. For the next 3 days, Claire, there is not one single person on this earth who's going to ask you where you were, or what you spent, or who you are." He put the truck in park and killed the engine, and the silence of the mountains rushed in to fill it. "You get to just be, whoever that turns out to be." Claire didn't answer right away. She was looking at the water. And then, without turning to him, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "I don't know who that is anymore. I really don't. I've been somebody's girlfriend, somebody's project, somebody's problem for so long that I genuinely don't know what's left when you take all that away." She finally turned to him, and her eyes were dry now, and steady and scared. "What if there's nothing? What if I take away everything he made me into, and there's just nothing underneath?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "There's something underneath," he said. "I've seen it. At the mailbox. When you thought nobody was watching and you'd smile at some bird or laugh at some joke you'd made to yourself. There's a whole person under there, Claire. She's just been holding her breath for 3 years. He opened his door and let the cold, clean mountain air pour in. So take a breath. We've got 3 days. Nobody's coming. He believed it when he said it. That was the thing he'd think about later, over and over in the weeks that followed. He'd meant it with his whole heart. Nobody's coming. He was wrong. 2 hours behind them and closing a black SUV followed a small blinking dot up into the mountains. Patient, unhurried, certain driven by a man who had decided over a cup of coffee at his kitchen table that morning that Claire Bennett was going to come home. One way or another. But that was 2 hours off, and neither of them knew it, and for now, there was only the lake and the cabin and a woman stepping out of a truck into the first free morning she'd had in 3 years. Claire stood at the edge of the gravel and looked out at all that water, and she pressed a hand flat against her own chest like she was checking to see if her heart was still there, if it still belonged to her. And Ethan watched her do it and understood that some part of the fight had already been won just by getting here. The rest of it was still coming. But the first battle, the hardest one, the one she'd been losing every single day for 3 years, the one against the voice in her own head that said, "You don't get to choose, you don't get to want, you don't get to leave Claire." Bennett had won that one at 7:10 that morning with a fist against a workshop door and 4 words she'd been too afraid to say for 2 years. "Give me 30 minutes. Ethan pulled her bag from the back of the truck and slung it over his own shoulder and started up the path toward the cabin. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you the porch. My grandfather built it. It's the best seat in the state." And Claire followed him, not behind him, the way she'd learned to walk half a step back and to the side where she wouldn't be in anyone's way. She walked beside him. Level. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she walked into a place like she had every right to be there. She had no idea how little time they had before the black SUV would come up that gravel drive and take it all away. But Ethan did. Or at least some part of him did, the part that had listened to his sister's warning. The part that had noticed the sleeve and the checking account and the careful, rehearsed way Claire talked about a man who'd never once raised his hand. That part of Ethan Miller stood on his grandfather's porch, looking back down the empty road they'd come up, and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the mountain air. A man like that doesn't lose things quietly. He looked at Claire standing at the porch rail with her face turned up to the sun, breathing like she'd forgotten she was allowed to. And he decided right then that whatever came up that road, he was not going to let her go back to holding her breath, whatever it cost him. The first thing Claire did inside the cabin was stop cold in the doorway, one hand on the frame, like she'd forgotten how to walk into a room she hadn't been given permission to enter. "You can come in," Ethan said, setting her bag down. "It's not a test." "I know." But she didn't move. "It's just, where do I put my stuff?" "Which room do you have a—" "I don't want to take the good bed or the—" "Claire." "What? You've been here 40 seconds and you've already apologized twice and asked me 3 questions about where you're allowed to stand." He said it gently, but he said it. "Pick a room. Any room. If you pick wrong, I'll tell you, and it'll be fine because there is no wrong." She stared at him. And then something happened to her face that he'd remember for a long time. It was like watching a fist unclench in slow motion. "You have no idea," she said quietly. "How strange that sentence sounds to me." "Which one? There is no wrong." She picked up her bag. She walked to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, the one with the window facing the water, and she set the bag on the bed and she stood there a second, and then she laughed a short, disbelieving sound. "I did it! I picked a room!" "Revolutionary." "Shut up." But she was smiling. Ethan went to build a fire because the cabin held the mountain cold the way old wood does, and because it gave his hands something to do while his brain worked on the problem it had been chewing since the driveway. The problem was this. He'd noticed her flinch when he'd raised his voice even a little to say her name. Not a big flinch. A quarter-second thing, a tightening around the eyes, a body remembering something the mind was trying to forget. Ryan Cole had never hit her, she'd said. Ethan believed her. He also knew that a body doesn't flinch like that for nothing. "You want coffee or something stronger?" he called. "What time is it?" "Little after 10. "Then coffee. Ask me again at 5. A pause. "God, listen to me. I asked you what time it was so I'd know whether I was allowed to want a drink." Her voice came closer. She'd wandered into the main room. "That's a Ryan thing." He'd say, "It's a little early, don't you think?" Not a rule, just a question. But it was always a rule wearing a question's clothes. Ethan looked up from the fire. "You want a drink at 10 in the morning, Claire, that's your business. I'm not going to pour it because it's 10 in the morning, and I don't want to be the guy who did that. But I'm not going to stop you either. Those are two different things." She sat down on the arm of the old couch and considered him. "You do that a lot." "Do what?" "Tell me where the line is between what you'll do and what I get to decide." She tilted her head. "Nobody's done that in so long I forgot people could. My wife used to do it for me." The words came out before he decided to say them, and he heard them land in the quiet. "After we lost the baby before Lily, I was in a bad place. Wanted to crawl inside a bottle and stay there. And Sarah, she didn't beg me not to, and she didn't threaten to leave. She just said, 'I'm not going to drink with you, and I'm not going to watch you do it either. So if that's the road, I'll be at my mother's, and I'll be there when you're done.' And then she went and put on her shoes." Ethan poked at the fire. "She was in the driveway before I got up off that couch, but I got up." Claire was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was something." "She was the whole thing." He stood, brushed off his knees. "Point is, love that lets you fall apart is just a nicer word for watching someone drown. Real thing draws the line and then stays on the other side of it in case you need a hand back over." He went to start the coffee. "Ryan didn't draw lines. He drew cages. There's a difference, and I think you've spent 3 years being told they're the same." He didn't hear her answer for a second. When he turned around, she had her hand pressed flat against her mouth and her eyes were wet, and she was nodding. "Say it again," she whispered. "Which part?" "Cages, not lines." Her voice broke on it. "I've been trying to explain it to myself for 2 years, and I didn't have the words, and you just handed them to me." The coffee maker gurgled. Outside, a loon called across the water, long and lonely. And Ethan stood in his grandfather's kitchen and understood that he was in more trouble than he'd let himself admit, because a man does not feel his own chest come apart, watching a woman find the right word for her own pain, unless something in him has already crossed a road it wasn't supposed to cross. He handed her the coffee. Their fingers touched. Neither of them said anything about it. They spent that first day easy the way you have to ease a frightened animal, though Ethan would never have said it that way out loud. He put her to work because work is a kindness to people who don't know what to do with an empty hour. There was an old chair on the porch, a ladder back his grandfather had made, one of the rungs cracked clean through. Ethan set it between them and handed Claire a scrap of sandpaper. "You're going to fix this with me." "I don't know how. That's the fun part." By noon, her hands were gray with wood dust, and she'd stopped apologizing every time she asked a question. By 1 o'clock, she was arguing with him about the grain direction and winning. By 2, she'd forgotten to check her phone, which had no signal anyway, which was the point. "There," she said, running her thumb along the joint they'd glued and clamped. "Is it good? It'll outlive both of us." I fixed a chair. She sat back and looked at it like it was a cathedral. "I haven't fixed anything in years. I've spent so long being the broken thing that I forgot I had hands that could—" She stopped. That sounded dramatic. It sounded true. Those aren't the same as dramatic whatever he taught you. Around 3, she asked if she could tell him something, and then didn't wait for permission, which he counted as progress. The writing thing. She was watching the lake. "It's worse than I made it sound in the truck. It's not just that he laughed at it, it's that I let him make it embarrassing, like wanting it was something shameful. Toward the end, I'd hide it. I had a notebook. I kept it in a shoebox in the back of the closet behind the winter coats. A grown woman, hiding a notebook like a teenager hiding cigarettes. Her jaw tightened. You know the worst part? He found it once. Didn't yell. Didn't tear it up. Just left it out on the kitchen table, open with a post-it note on it. And on the note he'd written, "This is really sweet, babe. That's all. This is really sweet." She turned to Ethan, and there was something almost wild in her eyes. Do you understand what that does to a person? He didn't have to burn it. He just made it small. He made my whole heart into something sweet, like a child's drawing on the fridge, and I never wrote in it again. Ethan set down the chair. Where's the notebook now? I threw it away, last year, in a fit of, I don't even know, cleaning, surrender. She laughed bitterly. I threw away the only real thing I had left, because he'd made me ashamed of it. Ethan went inside without a word. Claire watched him go confused, and when he came back, he had a legal pad and a pen, the yellow kind, the cheap kind, and he set them down on the little table beside her. I'm not going to read it, he said. I'm not going to ask what you wrote, or whether it's any good, or if it's really sweet. I'm going to go inside and cook dinner badly, and you're going to sit out here, and if a single sentence wants to come out of you, there's paper. He straightened up. And if nothing comes, that's fine too. There's no wrong, remember. He went inside. He did not look back because he understood that being watched was part of what had broken her, and he wasn't going to add to it. Through the window, over the sound of the pan and the water running, he heard nothing for a long time. 20 minutes. 30. He'd nearly convinced himself she was just sitting out there with the cold coffee staring at the lake. And that was okay, that was allowed. And then he heard it. The scratch of a pen on paper. Slow at first one word. A long pause, another. And then faster. And then, not stopping. Ethan stood at the sink with his hands in the dishwater and listened to Claire Bennett write for the first time in 2 years, and he had to grip the edge of the counter because it turned out you could be undone by the sound of a pen almost as easily as by the sound of a pen going silent. They ate on the porch as the sun went down. She didn't show him what she'd written, and he didn't ask, but she'd torn the pages off and folded them and put them in her pocket, and she kept touching the pocket all through dinner like a woman making sure something was still there. Can I ask you something? She said. You keep asking if you can ask. You can just ask. Right, sorry. Habit. She took a breath. Why didn't you ever say anything in the whole year? At the mailbox, the fence, the bread. There were times I'd catch you looking at me and I'd think, but then nothing. Why? Ethan chewed slowly, buying himself a second. Because you had a boyfriend. That's not the whole reason. No. He set down his fork. It's not. The whole reason is that I watched you, Claire, for a year, and I saw a woman who'd learned to disappear so completely that half the time I wasn't sure you knew you were doing it. And I thought a woman like that doesn't need another man deciding he's got feelings about her. She's got a man deciding things about her already. Last thing on earth she needs is a second one across the road waiting his turn. He looked at her. So I kept my mouth shut, and I fixed your fence, and I ate your bread, and I figured that was as much as I had any right to. Claire was quiet a long moment. You waited a whole year to not want anything from me. I didn't say I didn't want anything. He held her eyes. I said I didn't have any right to it. Those aren't the same either. Something passed between them then in the last of the light, and it was the closest they'd come to saying the thing out loud, and both of them knew it, and both of them looked away at the same moment, and Claire laughed a little breathless and said, You should go put wood on the fire before it dies. And Ethan said, Yeah, and got up too fast, and neither of them was fooling anybody, least of all themselves. That night, she slept 10 hours. He knew, because he was up at 5 the way he always was, and he heard her door still closed, and he made his coffee quiet as he could. And when she finally came out near 7, with her hair a mess and a crease from the pillow still on her cheek, she stopped in the doorway again, but this time not to ask permission. This time, she just stood there and looked at him at the stove and said, I slept. I actually slept. I can't remember the last time I slept, and didn't wake up at 3 doing math about what I'd said the day before. Doing math. Replaying it. Every conversation. looking for the thing I got wrong that he'd bring up later. She sat down at the table, wrapped her hands around the mug he set in front of her. You don't know you're doing it. It's just the weather in your head. And then you spend a night somewhere it's not raining and you realize, oh, this is what quiet feels like. That was the second morning. It was the best morning either of them had had in years. And it was the last good one before everything changed, though. They didn't know it, standing there in the kitchen with the light coming up off the lake, because 2 hours away, and closing the black SUV had spent the night in a motel parking lot off the highway, and its driver had spent that night not sleeping, but planning going over the words, he'd use the tone. He'd take the exact calibration of hurt and reason and quiet menace that had always brought her home. Ryan Cole was not a stupid man. He knew that showing up angry would only push her toward the neighbor. So he decided to show up wounded. Reasonable. A good man worried sick about a troubled woman. That was the version that worked. That was the version everyone believed. He was 40 minutes out when Claire on the porch said the sentence that would matter most. I've been thinking, she told Ethan, about what happens after. After what? After this, the 3 days end. We drive back down the mountain. And then, I go back across the road, back to that house, back to... She stopped herself. No, I'm not going back. I decided last night, I'm not going back to that house. Ethan felt his heart do something complicated. Okay. That's it. Okay. What did you expect me to say? I don't know. I expected you to make a plan. Tell me where I'd go. Fix it. She shook her head, almost laughing. God, even that's a Ryan thing. I told you, I'm not going back, and my first instinct was to hand you the problem so you could solve it, because that's what I do. I find a man, and I hand him my life, and I say, here you drive. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to hand you my life. I want... Then don't. She looked at him. You don't have to hand me anything, Ethan said. You want my help figuring out logistics apartments, a lawyer for the account he's got his hooks in. I'm here and I'll help and I won't drive. You point, I'll carry. But the wheel stays with you. He leaned forward. Claire, I don't want to be the next place you hide. I told myself that in the truck yesterday, and I'll tell you now straight because you deserve straight. If you leave one man's house and move into another man's arms 3 days later, you didn't leave. You transferred. And you'll wake up in a year and I'll be counting your coffee money in some new way I don't even know I'm doing, because that's what happens when one person owns the other person's freedom. I won't do it. I like you too much to do it. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then, you like me too much to be with me. I like you too much to catch you before you've learned to stand. He said it plainly. There's a difference. You keep finding out there's a difference. That's the whole story of the last 2 days, isn't it? Learning that all the things you thought were the same cages and lines, questions and rules, catching and owning, they were never the same. He just needed you to think they were. Claire stood up. She walked to the porch rail and gripped it and looked out at the water, and her shoulders were shaking, and Ethan gave her the space, and after a while she said without turning around, I finished a story last night, on your yellow legal pad. A whole story beginning to end, first time in 2 years. Her voice was thick. You want to know what it was about? Only if you want to tell me. It was about a woman who fixes a chair. She laughed and wiped her face and turned around. That's it. That's the whole story. A woman who fixes a broken chair and realizes halfway through that she's the chair. It's not even good. It's obvious. It's sentimental. Ryan would say it was really sweet. Ryan's not here. No. She looked at him and there was something new in her face, something that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Something that looked a great deal like a person coming back into her own eyes. No, he's not. And that was the moment. That was the exact moment, 10:40 on the second morning, when Claire Bennett stood on a porch overlooking a lake and felt for the first time in 3 years entirely and completely like a person who belonged to herself. It lasted about 90 seconds. Then Ethan heard the tires. He heard them before she did the low crunch of gravel down the long drive. A heavy vehicle taking the ruts slow and careful. His whole body went still, the way a body does when the animal part of it knows something the thinking part hasn't caught up to yet. He set down his coffee. He turned toward the sound. "Ethan?" Claire had seen his face change. "What is it?" "Somebody's coming up the drive." "That's not possible. Nobody comes up here. You said..." "Somebody's coming up the drive, Claire." And then she heard it too, and he watched 3 years of progress drain out of her in about 2 seconds. Watched her whole body fold back into the shape she'd worn when she'd first knocked on his door. Shoulders and chin down, a woman trying to take up less air. She knew. Before she could see the vehicle through the trees, she knew the way. "You know the sound of the one car in the world you've trained yourself to listen for." "No," she whispered. No, how I don't understand. I didn't tell anyone. I threw away the account." Ethan's voice was flat and certain. "The checking account he's got the login to. There's a card, isn't there? You used it somewhere." Her hand went to her mouth. "The gas station. I used it at the... No, I paid cash for the donuts, but the bathroom I bought... Oh God, I bought a phone charger. On the card. Because mine died and I wasn't thinking, He tracked the card." "He tracked the card?" She said it like a woman reading her own death certificate. And then the black SUV came around the last bend in the drive and rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. Unhurried, deliberate, and the engine cut off, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. Claire had gone absolutely white. Her hand found Ethan's forearm and gripped it hard enough to hurt. "Don't," she breathed. "Whatever he says, whatever he does, he's Ethan. He's very good at this. He's better at it than anyone you've ever met. He's going to seem so reasonable that you'll start to wonder if I made it all up. That's what he does. He'll make you doubt me. Please. Please don't let him..." "Claire?" Ethan put his hand over hers, just for a second firm. "Look at me. I fixed a chair with you yesterday. I heard you right last night. I know exactly who you are. There is nothing that man can say that's going to change what I saw with my own 2 eyes." He straightened. "Now let go of my arm and stand up straight and let me handle the first part. Not because you can't, because you shouldn't have to do it alone, and there's a difference between that and being rescued, and you know it now, don't you?" She looked at him, and slowly she let go of his arm, and she stood up straight, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand once hard and lifted her chin. "There she is," Ethan said quietly. The driver's door of the SUV opened, and Ryan Cole stepped out into the morning like a man arriving at a garden party, calm and unhurried, in a clean-pressed shirt, and an expression of such gentle, weary concern that even Ethan, who had been warned, who knew exactly what he was looking at, felt for one disorienting half-second the pull of it, the almost gravitational reasonableness of the man, the sense that surely someone so composed and so sad could only be here out of love. Then he saw Ryan's eyes. And Ryan's eyes were doing something completely different from the rest of his face. Ryan's eyes were flat and cold and moving over the porch, the cabin, the 2 coffee mugs, the fixed chair, Claire's bag visible through the open door, cataloging all of it, adding it up, building the case. Taking inventory of everything he intended to take back. "Claire," Ryan said, and his voice was soft, and it broke a little on her name perfectly, like a man barely holding it together. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you're okay. I've been out of my mind. I drove all night. Nobody knew where you were. You didn't answer your phone, I thought." He pressed a hand to his chest. "I thought something terrible had happened to you." Claire didn't move. Ethan felt her trembling beside him, but she didn't move, and he was proud of her in a way he didn't have time to examine. "You tracked my card," she said. The smallest flicker crossed Ryan's face. Annoyance quickly buried. "I was worried sick. Of course Claire, you disappeared. What was I supposed to do? Sit at home and wait, I love you. When someone you love vanishes, you look for them. That's not a crime. That's just... He spread his hands, helpless, wounded. That's just love, sweetheart. I don't understand why you're looking at me like I did something wrong. And there it was. Ethan watched it happen in real time. The thing Claire had warned him about, the reversal so smooth you almost couldn't see the seam. 30 seconds out of the car, and already Ryan had made himself the victim. Made his surveillance into devotion, made her flight into cruelty, and turned the whole thing so that Claire, who had done nothing but leave, was somehow the one who owed an apology. You must be the neighbor, Ryan said, turning to Ethan, and his voice cooled by 10 degrees, though the pleasant mask never slipped. He extended a hand. Ryan Cole, I don't think we've met. Ethan looked at the hand. He did not take it. Something moved behind Ryan's eyes, a recalculation. He let the hand drop unbothered, and his smile widened a fraction, the smile of a man who has just learned a useful thing about his opponent. No. All right, that's fine. I get it. You've probably heard some things. He glanced at Claire, then back to Ethan, and lowered his voice to a register of man-to-man confidence, one reasonable fellow to another. Look, I don't know what she's told you, and I'm not going to stand here and say a word against her because I love this woman whatever's happened. But I think you should know before you get in the middle of something you don't understand that Claire has episodes. She stops taking care of herself. She makes impulsive decisions and then she can't remember why. This isn't the first time she's just taken off. And every time somebody gets hurt, and every time it's me picking up the pieces. He sighed the sigh of a long-suffering man. So I'm not angry. I want you to understand that. I'm just tired, and I've come to take her home before she does something she can't undo. For a moment nobody spoke, and Ethan felt the trap of it, the sheer craftsmanship of it. Because everything Ryan had said was built to do one thing, make Ethan wonder. To plant the seed. Episodes. Impulsive. Can't remember why. It was designed so that every strange or vulnerable thing Claire had shown in the last 2 days, the flinching, the apologizing, the shame about the writing. The woman who didn't know who she was underneath could be reread in an instant as symptoms instead of scars. Ryan had handed him a key, and the key fit, and that was the horror of it. It fit because Ryan had cut it to fit. He'd spent 3 years making the wounds so that one day he could point at them and call them the disease. Claire made a small sound beside him. Defeat starting. Ethan heard it and knew that in about 4 more seconds she would begin to fold, would begin to wonder if maybe he was right, would begin to reach for the coat of her own smallness because it was warm and familiar and she'd worn it so long. So Ethan spoke before that could happen. You know what's funny, he said, and his voice was easy, almost friendly, which seemed to surprise Ryan more than shouting would have. In the 2 days she's been up here, she fixed a chair, cooked 3 meals, slept 10 hours, and wrote a short story from beginning to end. He tilted his head. That's not what an episode looks like, Ryan. That's what a person looks like when you finally stop standing on her air. The pleasant mask on Ryan Cole's face did not move. But his eyes did. His eyes went to Ethan and stayed there, and for one unguarded instant, the thing underneath came all the way up to the surface. The flat, cold, patient fury of a man who has just realized that this particular door is not going to open the way he'd planned. I see, Ryan said softly. So it's like that. It's like nothing, Ethan said. There's no like that. There's a woman standing on a porch who told you she used the card by accident and would like you to leave. That's the whole situation. Everything else is you. And Claire who had been folding, who had been reaching for her old small self, heard Ethan say she'd like you to leave, and she heard him leave the deciding to her even now, even here, even with her ex standing 10 feet away, radiating that awful, reasonable menace. He hadn't said we'd like you to leave. He hadn't said get out. He'd said she'd like you to leave, and he'd handed her one more time the wheel, and something in Claire Bennett, some small ember that 3 years of rain had never quite managed to put out, caught. She stepped forward, past Ethan. Not behind him, not sheltered by him. past him to the top of the porch steps so that she stood above Ryan and looked down at him, and when she spoke her voice was shaking, but it did not stop. "I want you to leave, Ryan." Ryan's smile flickered. "Claire, I used the card by accident. You tracked it because you track everything, because you've always tracked everything, because you gave me a bank account for my safety. And it was never about my safety. It was about the 6 o'clock text asking me about $4. Her voice rose. "I didn't have episodes. I had you. There's a difference. I'm just now learning there's a difference, because a man I fixed a chair with keeps showing me there's a difference. And you cannot stand here on this mountain and tell me I'm crazy, because for the first time in 3 years, I slept through the night and I know exactly what that means." Ryan's face had gone very still. "I'm not coming home," Claire said. "There's no home to come to. There's your house, and it was never mine. I just lived in it the way a hostage lives somewhere. So get in your car and drive back down this mountain and start figuring out what you're going to tell everyone in town about why I'm gone. Because I know you'll have a story ready by the time you hit the highway. You always have a story ready. But it won't be the true one, and for once in my life I don't care." The silence after that was total, and Ryan Cole looked at her for a long, long moment. This woman he had spent 3 years carefully, patiently taking apart, who was standing above him now, with her chin up and her voice steady and her eyes clear. And Ethan watched him make a decision. Watched the calculation finish behind those cold, flat eyes, and understood that the reasonable, wounded, long-suffering man was about to be put away because the reasonable man had failed, and Ryan Cole did not keep tools that failed. When Ryan spoke again, his voice had changed. It was quiet still. But the softness was gone, and what was left underneath was the thing Claire had lived with for 3 years behind closed doors, the thing no one in town had ever heard the true voice low and level and absolutely certain. "You think this is you being strong?" Ryan said. "Standing up there, playing house with the widower. You think this is the new Claire?" He took one step toward the porch, and Ethan felt every muscle in his own body come online. "But I know you. I know you better than you know yourself, and I know exactly how this ends. You'll ride this feeling for a week, maybe 2, and then the money runs out, and the lawyer costs more than you have, and this one." He flicked his eyes at Ethan without turning his head. "Figures out that a broken woman is a lot of work once the rescue part is over. And you'll be alone, and scared, and you'll remember that I was the one who took care of everything." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing on that whole cold mountain. "And you'll come home. You always come home, Claire. The only question is how much of yourself you throw away first." He let that sit. And then he turned unhurried and walked back toward the SUV, a man in complete control of a situation he had just entirely lost. And he opened the driver's door and paused with one hand on the frame and looked back up at the porch one last time. But he wasn't looking at Claire. He was looking at Ethan. "Nice cabin?" Ryan said pleasantly. "Miller is it, Ethan Miller. Woodworking shop off the county road. Little girl, 6'7". His smile didn't waver. "It's a small town. People talk. You should think real hard, Ethan, about how much of your quiet little life you want to spend on a woman who isn't even yours." And Ethan Miller, who had spent 2 days keeping his voice low and his hands gentle and his temper on a short leash, felt something go very cold and very clear inside him. Because Ryan Cole had just said his daughter's age out loud, and the meaning underneath it was not subtle, and both men knew it. The SUV's engine turned over. Ryan Cole backed down the drive slow and easy in no hurry at all, and the black vehicle disappeared around the bend in the trees, the same way it had come. And on the porch in the ringing silence, Claire finally stopped standing straight. Her legs went, and Ethan caught her before she hit the boards, and she gripped the front of his shirt with both fists, and shook, and he held her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. When she could talk again, her voice was very small. "He knows where you live," she whispered. "He knows about Lily. I brought this to your door. I brought him to your daughter." She pulled back and looked up at him with pure horror. "Ethan, What did I do? What did I just do to you? And Ethan Miller looked down the empty drive where the black SUV had gone, and then down at the woman in his arms, and he understood with total clarity that the weekend at the cabin was over, that whatever came next was going to cost all of them something, and that the man who'd just driven down that mountain had not, whatever it looked like, lost anything at all. He'd just gone to get better tools. They didn't stay a third night. Ethan made the call standing on the porch with Claire still gripping his shirt. And he made it fast because the thing about a threat spoken out loud is that it changes the math on everything, and the number that mattered most to Ethan Miller was 6 years old and staying at her aunt's house 2 counties away. "We're going down the mountain," he said. "Now, today. Not because he scared me. Because he said Lily's age out loud, and I'm not going to sit up here fishing while that man's between me and my kid." "Ethan, pack your bag. We'll talk in the truck." She didn't argue. That was the thing he noticed even in the middle of it 3 days ago. She'd have apologized for existing, and now, when it counted, she moved. She packed in 4 minutes. She carried her own bag. And when they pulled out of the drive and started down toward the highway, she had the yellow legal pad on her lap with both hands flat on top of it like it was the one thing she wasn't going to let anyone take. "Talk to me about him," Ethan said once they had signal again, and he'd texted his sister a single line. "Keep Lily till I call. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know. Explain later. Everything. The parts you didn't say yet. Because I just watched that man work, and he's better than you even told me, and I need to know what I'm dealing with." Claire was quiet for a mile. "He was a lawyer," she said finally. "Did I ever tell you that?" Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. "No, you did not tell me that. Corporate. He doesn't practice anymore. He does consulting investments. I never fully understood it. That was sort of the point. But he went to law school. He knows exactly how far he can go and stay on the right side of the line. That's the thing about Ryan. He never crosses the line. He just lives right up against it and makes you feel crazy for noticing." She stared out the windshield. When he said that thing about Lily's age that wasn't a threat, not a legal one, he'd never say anything a court could touch. He said an age, that's all. Just a number. And if you tried to tell anyone he'd threatened your daughter, they'd look at you like you were paranoid because all he did was guess how old a little girl is. That's how he does everything. He hands you a knife and then acts shocked that you're bleeding. Okay. Ethan made himself breathe. So he's smart. He's careful. What does he actually want? Walk me through it. Not what he says he wants. What he wants. Control. She said it without hesitation. It was never about loving me. I used to think it was love that got twisted. It wasn't. It was control wearing love's face. And the thing he cannot survive, the one thing is losing in a way other people can see. She turned to look at him. That's why the cabin failed for him. He came up expecting me to fold in private, come home quiet, and he could tell everyone I'd had one of my rough patches. Instead, I stood on a porch in front of a witness and told him, no. You saw it. You saw him lose. And he can't have that. Whatever he does next, it's going to be about making sure that never happened. He's going to rewrite it. He's going to make me the villain, or make me sick, or make me, I don't know what. But he's going to spend real energy now, because you turned a private surrender into a public defeat, and Ryan would rather burn the whole thing down than let that stand. Ethan drove for a moment. You said he'll have a story ready by the time he hits the highway. He will. What's the story, Claire? Best guess. What does he tell the town? She closed her eyes. That I had a breakdown. That I've been struggling for a while. He didn't want to say anything so private, but honestly, he's relieved it's finally out in the open. That I ran off with a married man, no, a widower, that's better. That's sadder, a poor widower with a little girl who I've... God. Her eyes flew open. He'll make it about Lily. He'll say I inserted myself into your life, into your daughter's life, an unstable woman latching onto a grieving family. That's the version. That's the one that makes everyone feel sorry for you and terrified of me. And it protects him completely because look how gracious he is. Look how worried poor Ryan and that poor man and his motherless child. Ethan felt the cold thing in his chest sharpen into something with edges. Because he could see it. He could see exactly how it would play in a town where Ryan Cole had shaken every hand and funded half the fire station, and where Ethan Miller was the quiet widower who kept to himself and didn't come to church socials. He could see whose word people would take. "Then we get ahead of it," he said. "You can't get ahead of Ryan. Nobody gets ahead of Ryan. Watch me." They came down off the mountain and back into cell range and back into the world, and the world was already moving. Claire's phone, which she'd kept off for 2 days, lit up the second she turned it on, and Ethan heard it buzzing in her lap over and over, a horrible cascade. "Don't read them all," he said. "Read who they're from." She scrolled, and her face got worse with each name. "Amy. My old friend Amy. She's texted 6 times. She says people are saying, 'Oh no, Ethan, it's already my cousin, my aunt, a woman from the, how does everyone already know? It's been 3 hours. How does everyone already?' Because he started calling from the highway." Ethan's voice was flat. "Just like you said. Are you okay?" She read aloud, her voice cracking. "Ryan called. He's so worried. He said you'd left with some man and weren't yourself. Please call someone. We're all so worried about you. They think everyone thinks I..." She dropped the phone in her lap and pressed both hands over her face, and Ethan heard the panic climbing into her breathing, the old rain starting again, harder now. "He did it. In 3 hours. Everyone I know thinks I've lost my mind and run off, and every single one of them heard it from him, so it's already true. It's already the truth, because that's how truth works. It's whoever gets there first with the most people. Claire, breathe." "I can't fight that. You understand, there's no fighting that. He's got the whole town, and I've got a legal pad and a story about a chair. You've got a witness." Ethan pulled the truck over onto the shoulder, put it in park, and turned to face her fully, because this mattered too much to say to a windshield. "Look at me. You are not fighting him alone, and you are not fighting him with a legal pad. You've got me. I was there. I heard every word he said, including the part about my daughter. And here's the thing, that man made a mistake about Claire. He thinks I'm the quiet widower who won't make trouble. He built his whole story on me being too private and too proud to stand up in front of people and say what I saw. And on any other day of my life, he'd be right." Ethan's jaw was tight. "But he said my kid's age out loud on my grandfather's porch, so he picked the wrong widower." Claire lowered her hands and looked at him. "We're not going to out-charm him," Ethan said. "You're right, we can't. But charm's not the only thing that's true. There's evidence. You've been building it for 3 years without knowing it. The account he controls, that's a record. Every 6 o'clock text asking about $4, those are on your phone. Screenshots, timestamps. The thing about a man who lives right up against the line is that he's always leaving a mark on his own side of it, because he's so sure nobody will ever line them all up." He held her eyes. "So we're going to line them all up." Something shifted in her face. Not hope, not yet, but the panic stopped climbing. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've never done anything like this in my life." He put the truck back in gear. "But I raised a daughter alone through a custody fight with a mother-in-law who thought I couldn't do it. And I learned one thing in that year that I have never forgotten. The person who wins isn't the one who's loudest or richest or best liked. It's the one who kept the receipts." They drove the rest of the way to his sister's in a different kind of silence than before. Not the frightened kind, the working kind. 10:40 that morning, she'd stood on a porch and won. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, she'd learned that winning the moment and winning the war were 2 entirely different things, and that Ryan Cole had already fired the first shot of the second one before she'd even packed her bag. Denise met them at the door with Lily behind her legs, and Denise's face was a storm. "I've had 4 phone calls," she said low so Lily wouldn't hear. 4. Since noon. From people I barely talked to. All of them concerned. All of them careful. She looked at Claire, and Claire braced for it, and Denise surprised them both. And every single one of them told the exact same story, with the exact same words. And I've been a nurse for 20 years, honey. When 4 people tell me the identical story in the identical language, I don't think it's true. I think somebody wrote a script. She stepped back to let them in. So, which one of you is going to tell me what actually happened and what we're going to do about the man who's been dialing this county all afternoon? Ethan let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. You believe her? I believe my eyes. I watched that woman shrink for a year. Denise's voice gentled as she looked at Claire. And you don't look shrunk right now. You look scared, which is different. Scared I can work with. She turned. Lily, baby, go get your crayons, show Miss Claire the dragon you drew. And Lily. 6 years old, reading the room the way she read everything, did not go get her crayons. She walked straight past her aunt and up to Claire and looked at her with Sarah's stubborn chin and said, Are you the lady that made everybody upset? Daddy got a lot of phone calls? The room went still. Claire crouched down. Her voice shook, but she didn't lie to the kid, and Ethan loved her for it all at once completely, in a way he'd been fighting for 2 days. Somebody's telling stories about me that aren't true, Claire said, and it made a lot of grown-ups upset. But I promise you, I would never do anything to hurt your daddy. Or you. Lily studied her for a long, serious moment. The man that called Daddy, was he your boyfriend? He was. Is he mean? Claire looked at the child and something crossed her face, some decision to tell one small truth to one small person. Yeah, baby, he's mean, but he hides it real good. Lily nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. That's the worst kind, she said. The kind that hides it. And then she took Claire's hand, matter of fact, and said, Come see my dragon, and led her off toward the crayons. And Ethan had to turn away and look out the window for a second, because his 6-year-old had just diagnosed Ryan Cole more accurately than any adult in the county. Denise stood beside her brother. You know this isn't going to be a couple of phone calls and done. I know. He's got money. He's got the whole town preloaded. And you, she said it gently, you've got a reputation for being the man who doesn't get involved. People are going to wonder why you're involved now. And some of them are going to land right where he wants them to land. I know that too. Then you know what this costs. Denise turned him by the shoulder, so he had to look at her. It's not just her fight anymore, Ethan. The second you stand up and say, I was there, I saw it. You're the widower who ran off to a cabin with another man's girlfriend. That's your name now in this town for as long as people want to say it. Lily's going to hear it on a playground someday. You understand? You're not deciding whether to help a neighbor. You're deciding whether to hand your daughter that. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. So I'm going to ask you once, as your sister and I want the true answer. Is she worth that? And Ethan Miller stood in his sister's living room and looked across it at Claire Bennett, who was on her knees on the floor next to his daughter, admiring a crayon dragon like it was hanging in a museum. This woman who 2 days ago couldn't pick a bedroom without asking permission, and today had stood on a porch and told a man who terrified her to leave. 3 days ago, I'd have said no, he said quietly. I'd have said, keep your head down, don't get involved, protect the quiet life. And I'd have driven her home and watched her disappear back into that house and told myself it wasn't my business. He didn't look away from Claire. And I'd have been a coward with good manners, and I'd have known it every day for the rest of my life. That's not an answer. Yeah, Denise, she's worth it. He finally turned to his sister. Because it was never really about her. It's about Lily. That kid just told me the worst kind of mean is the kind that hides it. Where'd she learn that nobody taught her that? She learned it by watching. And if I teach her that when you see a bully hurting somebody, the smart thing, the safe thing, is to look away and protect yourself, then I don't care what else I teach her, I've raised her wrong. His voice was rough. I'd rather she hear my name on a playground and know her daddy stood up than watch me sit down and learn that's what men do. Denise looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, brisk and businesslike a nurse again. Okay then. Okay, then we do it right. She grabbed a notepad off the counter. First thing. She needs a lawyer before he does, not after. And not some guy from around here who golfs with Ryan Cole. Somebody from Charlotte. Somebody who owes nobody in this county anything. She was already writing. Second thing, Ethan said, is the account. That evening at Denise's kitchen table after Lily was asleep, they lined it up. Claire sat with her phone, and Ethan sat beside her, and Denise stood over them with the notepad, and one by one, Claire went back through 3 years of her own life and started taking screenshots. It was worse than Ethan had imagined. He'd known it was bad. He hadn't known the shape of it, the sheer patient volume of it. The 6 o'clock texts weren't occasional. They were daily. Years of them. What was the $6 at the pharmacy? What was the $12? You went to lunch with who? I checked, and the car was at the mall for 2 hours. What were you doing for 2 hours? Not angry? Never angry. Always reasonable. Always caring. Always worried, a wall of gentle, relentless surveillance, stretching back so far that Claire had genuinely stopped seeing it as strange. Stop? Claire said at one point, halfway through a year, her hand shaking on the phone. Stop. I can't seeing them all together like this. She pressed her hand to her mouth. I lived this. I lived every single one of these, and I told myself it was normal. I told myself he was just careful with money. Protective. I made excuses to myself in real time thousands of times for years, and I never once. Her voice broke completely. How did I not see it? How did I let it? Because that's how it works. Denise sat down across from her and took her hand. You don't see the ocean when you're a fish in it. He didn't dump all this on you in one day you'd have run. He gave it to you one text at a time, so slow that each one felt reasonable, and by the time it added up to this, you'd forgotten what dry land looked like. She squeezed. You're seeing it now because you finally stood on some. 2 days on a mountain, and you can already see the ocean. Honey, that's not you being stupid for 3 years. That's you being strong right now. Claire looked at her, and then at Ethan, and something in her steadied. She picked the phone back up. Okay, she said. Okay, keep going. And they kept going. And by midnight, they had it 3 years of it time-stamped, organized, undeniable, a record so complete that Claire's private, deniable, gaslit reality had become page by page, screenshot by screenshot, a documented fact. And then at 12:40 in the morning, Claire's phone buzzed in her hand with a new message live right in front of them, and all 3 of them went still. It was from Ryan. Claire's thumb hovered. I shouldn't read it. Read it, Ethan said, but out loud. Don't carry it alone. She opened it, and she read it, and her voice went flat and strange. I hope you got the space you needed. I've talked to everyone and smoothed it all over. I told them you've been under a lot of stress, and they understand. Nobody's angry. Your job is safe. I called your boss. Come home whenever you're ready. No questions. No fight, I promise. I'll have the guest room made up if you want space. I just want you safe. I love you. R. Silence at the kitchen table. That's... Denise started. That almost sounds... kind. Ethan finished quietly. It sounds kind. It sounds perfect. Claire whispered. And she was shaking now, but not from fear, from something closer to horror, from recognition. Don't you see, this is it. This is the most dangerous thing he does. He didn't threaten me. He forgave me. For something I didn't do. He called my boss, which means he can uncall my boss. He smoothed it over with everyone, which means he owns the version everyone believes, and he can change it whenever he wants. He offered me the guest room, which sounds so reasonable, so mature. Except I never asked for a guest room, I asked to leave, and he's already deciding the terms of a homecoming I never agreed to. Her breath was ragged. 6 hours ago he told me I'd throw myself away first. Now he's the gentlest man alive. That's not 2 different Ryans. That's one Ryan showing me both hands, so I understand he's holding all the cards in both of them. Ethan looked at the message on her screen, and a cold understanding settled over him. He knows, Ethan said slowly. Knows what? He knows the angry stuff didn't work. He watched it fail on the porch. So he's switching to the version that's always worked, the reasonable, loving, forgiving version. And he sent it now tonight because he's betting that after a hard day, scared and tired and overwhelmed by the whole town, this is the moment you're weakest. This is the moment the guest room and the smoothed-over job sound like relief instead of a leash. He turned to her. He's not wrong about the timing, Claire. He's very, very good. If you didn't have that phone full of screenshots sitting right in front of you, if you were alone in a motel room right now reading this, would it be working? Claire stared at the message. At the I love you. At the no questions, no fight. At 3 years of muscle memory pulling at her, the deep grooved pull toward the easy thing, the familiar thing, the thing that would make all the phone calls stop. Yes, she admitted, and her voice was barely there. God help me. Yes. If I were alone right now, I think I'd go home. The honesty of it landed hard in the quiet kitchen. And then Claire set the phone face down on the table and put both hands flat on top of it and took a breath and lifted her chin. But I'm not alone, she said. And I've got the screenshots. And I know what the guest room is. It's the same cage with a nicer note on it. She looked up. I'm not answering him. Not tonight, not to say no, not anything. Because the second I answer, I'm in a conversation, and he wins every conversation. Silence is the only thing he can't argue with. Ethan felt something in his chest that he could only describe as pride. And under it, buried the thing he still wasn't letting himself say. That's exactly right. I know it's right. She almost smiled, exhausted. You taught me. Cages, not lines. Silence, not conversation. God, I'm learning a whole new language, and it's 2 a.m. She rubbed her face. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow you call the lawyer in Charlotte, Denise said, standing, gathering the mugs. Tomorrow this stops being a story he tells the town and starts being a case with your name on the right side of it. Get some sleep, both of you. There's blankets in the hall closet. She paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at Claire, and her voice softened one more time. You did good tonight, honey. You looked at the nicest thing that man said to you in 3 years, and you saw the wire in it. That's not paranoia. That's finally being awake. And she went to bed. Ethan and Claire sat alone at the table a moment longer. You should sleep, he said. I know. She didn't move. She was looking at the phone, face down, silent. Can I tell you the thing I'm most afraid of? And it's not him showing up again. It's not the town. It's... She stopped, gathered herself. I'm afraid that in a week or a month when this is hard, when the lawyer costs too much and everyone still believes his story and I'm sleeping on somebody's couch with no job and no plan. I'm afraid that message tonight is going to look better and better. And there won't be a kitchen table full of screenshots to save me. There'll just be me and the tired and the pull. And I don't know if the person I am right now is strong enough to still be here in a month. She looked up at him, and it was the most honest thing she'd said in 3 days. He's not wrong that I always come home. He's just wrong about why. I don't come home because I'm weak. I come home because being alone with the pull for long enough wears down anybody. And I'm scared of the wearing down. Ethan was quiet for a moment. And then he reached over and he picked up the yellow legal pad off the counter where she'd set it, and he put it down on the table in front of her. Then you don't do it alone with the pull, he said. That's the whole thing he counted on for 3 years, you alone. So the plan isn't be strong enough by yourself. Nobody's strong enough by themselves. That's not weakness. That's just being a person. The plan is you're not by yourself. You've got Denise, who's already fielding his phone calls and calling them scripts. You've got a lawyer tomorrow. You've got a kid downstairs who thinks you're worth a dragon drawing. He tapped the legal pad. And you've got this. Every time the pull gets bad, you write. Doesn't matter what. You put the pull on the page instead of in your body, and you look at it in daylight, and it gets smaller because everything he ever did got smaller the second you dragged it into the light. That's the one thing he can't survive, Claire. Light. And you've got a whole pad of it. Claire looked at the legal pad, then at him. And her eyes filled, and this time she let them. You keep doing that, she said thickly. Doing what? Handing me things I can hold instead of holding them for me. She wiped her eyes. You have no idea what that is. To me. After him. And for a moment, they just looked at each other across the kitchen table, at 2 in the morning, exhausted and scared, and something else. Something neither of them was going to name tonight. Not with everything else on the table, not with her whole life on fire. Ethan stood up first. Because someone had to. Get some sleep. Big day. Ethan? He stopped in the doorway. Thank you for picking the wrong widower, she said. He huffed a laugh despite everything. Get some sleep, Claire. He went down the hall, and Claire Bennett sat alone at the kitchen table for a while longer, with a silent phone face down under one hand and a yellow legal pad under the other, the leash and the light. And after a long moment, she pushed the phone away and pulled the legal pad close and picked up the pen. And she started to write. She didn't know yet that 300 miles away, in a Charlotte office she'd call in the morning, there was a lawyer who specialized in exactly this coercive control. Financial abuse, the cases nobody could prove, because they never left a mark. She didn't know that the screenshots on her phone were about to stop being a private diary of her humiliation and become the strongest evidence anyone had ever handed that lawyer's firm. She didn't know that Ryan Cole at that same hour was sitting in his own kitchen, not sleeping, staring at a phone that had not lit up with her reply, and feeling for the first time in 3 years the specific cold panic of a man whose most reliable tool had just gone silent on him. She didn't know any of it. She just knew that the pull was bad tonight, and that Ethan had told her to put it on the page. So she did. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, without deciding to, without even noticing when it happened, the writing stopped being about the pull, and started being about a woman who fixed a chair and then fixed herself. And then when a mean man came up a mountain to break both, discovered she was the one holding the hammer. The lawyer's name was Patricia Vance, and she did not golf with anyone in the county. And when Claire finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment on the phone. And then she said something that Claire would remember for the rest of her life. Ms. Bennett, I want you to hear me clearly. Everything you just described has a name. It's called coercive control, and in a lot of places, it's not just cruel, it's illegal. You didn't imagine it. You didn't overreact. You survived something that's specifically designed to make its victims believe they're crazy. And the fact that you kept those messages, most people delete them out of shame, means you may have done the single smartest thing a person in your position can do. A pause. How soon can you get to Charlotte? Claire looked across Denise's kitchen at Ethan, who was pretending to read the paper and not listening to every word, and at Denise, who wasn't pretending at all. This afternoon, Claire said. I can come this afternoon. That was 9:15 on the morning after the cabin. By 10 they were in the truck. By noon, Claire was sitting in a glass conference room in Charlotte, watching Patricia Vance scroll through 3 years of her life on a firm laptop, and every so often the lawyer would stop and go very still and make a small note and say nothing. This one, Vance said, finally turning the screen. The account. He has the login, and you don't have his consent to close it, correct? He set it up in a way where technically it's a joint account, but functionally he controls every dollar. Yes. And these texts about individual purchases daily for years, she scrolled. Ms. Bennett, do you understand what you're showing me? Most financial abuse is invisible. It happens in a marriage verbally, no paper trail, and it's my word against his forever. You have a paper trail 3 years deep. He was so certain you'd never fight back that he documented his own control in writing every single day and handed you the evidence himself. She sat back. In 15 years, I have rarely seen a record this clean. He wasn't careful. He was arrogant. And arrogance leaves fingerprints. Claire felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. It took her a second to even recognize it. It was the feeling of being believed by someone with power. There's more, Ethan said from the corner. He'd been quiet the whole time, letting it be Claire's. He came to my family's cabin, uninvited. He tracked a debit card to find the location. And while he was there in front of me, he referenced my 6-year-old daughter's age unprompted out of nowhere right after I refused to help him take Claire home. He kept his voice level. I know it's not a threat you can charge. He's too smart for that. But I was a witness, and I'll say under oath exactly what I heard, and the tone he used when he said it. Patricia Vance looked at Ethan for a long moment. You'd testify? Yes. You understand what that opens you up to. He'll make you the story, the widower, the cabin, the... I've heard the story, Ethan said. My sister already ran the numbers on what it costs me. I'll pay it. Vance studied him another second, then nodded slowly and made another note. Good. A credible outside witness changes the texture of everything. Juries and judges believe patterns, and the pattern here is a man who follows, tracks, controls, and issues implied threats to anyone who helps her leave. She closed the laptop. Ms. Bennett, here's what I want to do, and I want your permission before I do any of it, because you've had enough people making decisions about your life. Claire almost laughed at how badly she needed to hear exactly that sentence. Go ahead. First, we freeze the account and get you separate finances today. Your money, your name, your login, nobody else's. Second, we send Mr. Cole a letter formal on our letterhead that does two things. It notifies him that you are represented by counsel, which means he communicates with you through me now, not directly. And it puts him on notice that his contact is being documented. She held up a hand before Claire could react. And I want to be honest with you because I don't lie to my clients. This will make him angry, and it will make him worse before it makes him better. A man like this experiences a lawyer's letter as a declaration of war. He is going to escalate. The town, the reputation, all of it. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. The room was quiet. How much harder? Claire asked. I don't know. That depends on him. But I've done this a long time, and I'll tell you the pattern. Men like Ryan Cole are terrifying right up until the exact moment they realize the person they've been controlling has professional help, documentation, and witnesses. And then something changes. Because their entire power was built on the certainty that no one would ever line it all up. Once it's lined up, they're not dealing with a scared woman anymore. They're dealing with a case. And most of them, when they see the case, do not want it in front of a judge, because everything they've done only works in the dark. She looked at Claire steadily. The question isn't whether he'll escalate. He will. The question is whether you can hold your nerve through the escalation long enough to get to the part where he can't win. Can you, Anne? And Claire thought about 3 a.m. at Denise's kitchen table, and the yellow legal pad, and the pull, and the thing she'd told Ethan, I'm scared of the wearing down. Not by myself, she said honestly. But I'm not by myself anymore. Patricia Vance smiled for the first time. That's the right answer. The ones who say I can handle it alone are the ones I worry about. She stood and extended her hand. Let's go to work. They drove back that evening with the finances frozen and the letter drafted. And Claire was quiet most of the way, but it was a different quiet than the mountain. It was the quiet of a person absorbing the fact that the ground under her had for the first time in 3 years stopped moving. 11:40 that night, the escalation began exactly as Vance had promised. It didn't come as a phone call. Ryan was too smart for that now. He knew she was represented. New calls could be logged. It came sideways through the town the way everything with Ryan came sideways. Claire's old friend Amy called Denise's house in tears. Claire, I have to tell you something, and I hate it, Amy said, and Claire put her on speaker so Ethan and Denise could hear. He's telling people you emptied a joint account and ran, that you cleaned him out and disappeared with some man. He's showing people the bank alert, the one where the account got frozen. He's saying you stole from him, and that's why he had to involve lawyers. And Claire, people believe it, because there's a real bank thing they can see, and... Claire closed her eyes. He flipped it. He what? The account. My lawyer froze it today to protect me from him, and he's taking the exact same action and telling everyone I did it to rob him. She almost laughed. It was so perfect, so backwards, so entirely Ryan. He turned the one thing that protects me into proof I'm a thief. God, he's fast. He's so fast. Denise was already shaking her head. That's slander. That's flat-out slander. You can't just... Yes, he can, Claire said tiredly. Because he's not saying I stole. Listen to what Amy actually heard. He's not saying it. He's showing people a real bank alert and letting them draw the conclusion. He never says the word. He hands them the knife and acts shocked when they cut me. It's the porch all over again. It's Lily's age all over again. He lives right up against the line and makes the whole world do his dirty work for him. Ethan felt the cold thing in his chest, the one that had been there since the porch sharpened into something clear and decided. Then we call the lawyer, he said. Tonight. This is exactly what she needs to know. But it was Claire who stopped him, and what she said next was the first real sign of who she was becoming. No, Claire said. Not tonight, and not to react. Ethan turned. Claire, he's telling the whole town you're a thief. I know what he's doing. And I know the old me would be up all night calling everyone, defending myself, sending explanations, screenshots, proof, begging people to believe me. Running around behind him, cleaning up every mess he makes, which is exactly what he wants. Because a woman running around defending herself looks guilty and exhausted and unstable, and that proves his whole story. She stood up, and there was something in her voice Ethan had never heard before, something level and cold and awake. I'm done chasing his messes. Let him tell them I'm a thief. In 3 weeks, Patricia Vance is going to have documentation showing I froze my own account legally through a lawyer to protect myself from financial abuse. And every person he's telling tonight is going to find out he lied to their face. He's not building a case against me right now, Amy. He's building a case against himself. He just doesn't know it yet because he's never once in his life had someone keep the receipts. The kitchen was silent. Who are you? Amy said finally on the phone, half laughing, half crying. And what did you do with Claire? I fixed a chair, Claire said. It's a long story. That was the turn. Ethan saw it, and Denise saw it, the moment Claire stopped playing defense on Ryan's field and started playing her own game, the slow, patient game of a woman who finally understood that the truth doesn't have to win. The night it just has to win the record. But Ryan Cole did not go quietly into that record, and 3:20 the next afternoon he made his biggest move, and it was the one that nearly worked. He didn't come to the house. He was smarter than that now. He knew a man showing up looked like a man showing up. So instead, Ethan got a phone call at the shop from a number he didn't know, and it was a woman's voice, warm and professional and terrible. Mr. Miller, my name is Susan Reyes. I'm a licensed social worker with the county. I'm calling because we've received a report expressing concern about a minor child in your home. Your daughter related to an unstable adult who's reportedly been staying with you. I want to be clear. This is just a wellness inquiry at this stage. Nothing formal. But I would need to come out and speak with you and see the child's living situation. Ethan's whole body went cold. He gripped the workbench. Who filed the report? He said. I'm not able to share that, Mr. Miller, but I do need to schedule a visit. He got off the phone and stood in his shop in the middle of the half-finished dresser and the wood dust and the ordinary quiet of his ordinary life, and he understood that Ryan Cole had just found the one thing Ethan could not. Out-nerve, could not wait out, could not stay silent through. Ryan had gone after Lily, not with a threat. Never with a threat. With a phone call to Child Protective Services. Anonymous deniable dressed up as concern, an unstable woman around a motherless child, the exact story Claire had predicted on the drive down the mountain, now weaponized into a government file with his daughter's name in it. Ethan drove home so fast, he scared himself. Claire took one look at his face when he came through the door and stood up. What happened? He called CPS on me. Ethan's voice shook and he didn't try to hide it. Anonymous report. Unstable adult around a minor. They want to come out and inspect my home and interview my daughter. He put both hands flat on the counter and leaned on them because his legs weren't entirely steady. He went after Lily Claire. He said he would on the porch and I heard it and I still didn't think he'd actually. He stopped. This is what you meant. This is the man behind the reasonable one. He'll burn a 6-year-old's life down to win, and he'll do it with a phone call so clean nobody can ever prove it was him. And here is where the story turned at 4:40 in the afternoon, in a small kitchen, because Claire Bennett heard that Ryan had gone after a child after Lily, who had drawn her a dragon, who had held her hand, and told her the worst kind of mean was the kind that hides it. And something happened in Claire that 3 years of Ryan Cole had never managed to produce. She stopped being afraid. He'd broken her 1,000 ways, and she'd folded every time. But she watched him reach past her, through her, to hurt a little girl who'd done nothing but be kind to her, and the fear she'd carried for 3 years didn't get bigger. It burned off, all at once, like fog in the sun. "No," Claire said, and her voice was so quiet and so certain that Ethan looked up. "No, he doesn't get her. He can have my reputation and my money and the whole town. I don't care anymore, but he does not get to touch that child. That's the line. That's where I stop being afraid of him, right there." "Claire, call Vance, right now, and I'll tell you exactly what she's going to say, because I finally understand how this works." Claire was already moving, already grabbing her phone, and there was a fire in her Ethan had never seen. She's going to say this is the best thing that could have happened, because a man who was careful for 3 years just got sloppy. An anonymous CPS report on the same week his controlled partner leaves and gets a lawyer. With a documented history, Ethan, he just handed us the retaliation. He just proved the pattern. He's been so careful to stay on his side of the line for 3 years, and the second he felt himself losing, he jumped over it with both feet. That's not a threat to you. That's evidence against him. Ethan stared at her. "You think—" "I think he finally made a mistake." She was dialing. The porch was arrogance. The bank flip was clever. But calling CPS on a good father to punish the woman who left him, that's not clever, that's panic, and panicked people leave marks. She put the phone to her ear. "And we keep the receipts." Patricia Vance answered on the second ring, and Claire told her fast and clear, and there was a silence on the line, and then Vance said in a voice that had gone very sharp, "Ms. Bennett, put me on speaker. Mr. Miller, I need you to listen carefully because what you do in the next 48 hours matters more than anything else in this case." A breath. "First, you welcome that home visit. You do not fight it. You do not delay it. You invite it. You let them see exactly what your home is, which by everything you've told me is a stable, loving home with a well-cared-for child." CPS workers see real neglect every day. They know the difference between a real case and a weaponized one within about 10 minutes, and a clean home with a happy kid and a father cooperating fully is the fastest way to close a file. Her voice hardened. "Second, this report does not hurt you. It helps us. Because I'm going to make a records request, and I'm going to establish the timeline, and any judge in the state can read a calendar. Woman leaves controlling partner, gets counsel, freezes shared account, and within days, an anonymous report lands on the new man in her life. That's not concern for a child, Your Honor. That's a documented pattern of retaliation and coercive control. He didn't attack your daughter, Mr. Miller. He confessed." Ethan sat down slowly at the kitchen table. He confessed. To anyone who knows how to read it, this is the mistake I was waiting for. Careful men are hard to catch. Frightened men catch themselves. Vance's voice gentled a fraction. "I know it doesn't feel like a victory right now. You've got a social worker coming to look at your child, and that's every good parent's nightmare, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But Mr. Miller, hold your nerve for 2 more weeks. Let the system do exactly what he's trying to abuse it into doing, and watch it turn around in his hands. Can you do that?" Ethan looked across the table at Claire. At this woman who 3 days ago couldn't pick a bedroom, and who had just in the space of 1 phone call gone from terrified to strategic to steal because someone had threatened a child. "Yeah," he said. "I can hold my nerve. Good, because here's the last thing, and I want you both to hear it." Vance paused. "The reason men like this win over and over for years is that everyone around the victim eventually gets tired. The friends get tired of the drama. The family gets tired of the mess. And one by one, they drift until the victim is alone again, which is exactly where he needs her. His whole strategy is patience. He's betting he can outlast everyone who's helping you. So the only way you lose this is if the people around Ms. Bennett get tired and go home." Her voice was pointed now, aimed at Ethan specifically. "Are you going to get tired, Mr. Miller?" And Ethan understood that this was the real question. The one Denise had asked in her living room, the one that had been sitting underneath everything since the porch. Not is she worth one hard week, but is she worth the long game, the grind, the thing with no clean ending, the thing that costs and costs? No, Ethan said. I'm not going to get tired. Then you're going to win, said Patricia Vance and hung up. The home visit came 3 days later. Susan Reyes was kind and thorough, and she watched Lily show her the dragon drawing and the fixed chair and the wood shop where Daddy made things, and she watched Lily climb into Ethan's lap without a flicker of the fear that CPS workers learn to spot in a heartbeat, and she saw a clean home, and a full refrigerator and a little girl who was by every measure thriving. She was there 40 minutes. Before she left, she pulled Ethan aside at the door and lowered her voice and said something she probably wasn't supposed to. Mr. Miller, off the record, I've done this job 11 years. I know a real report from a spite report, and I know a good father from a paperwork problem. She glanced back at Lily. I'm closing this today, but I'll tell you what I'd tell anyone in your situation. Whoever made that call, and I think we both know the type, they don't stop because one thing failed. Document everything. Keep records. And if it's connected to a custody or protective matter, tell your lawyer this happened because a false report to this office to gain advantage in another case is something judges take very, very seriously. She shook his hand. Take care of that little girl. She's clearly loved. And she left, and Ethan closed the door, and he stood there for a second, and then he laughed a rough, disbelieving, exhausted laugh because Ryan Cole had reached out to destroy his family with the cleanest, most deniable weapon he had, and it had blown up in his hands exactly as Claire had said it would. Exactly as Vance had said it would. The social worker herself had just handed them the roadmap. He turned around. Claire was standing in the kitchen doorway, and she'd heard the whole thing, and they looked at each other across the little house. She's closing it, Ethan said. I heard. You were right, every word. He panicked and he confessed, and it turned around in his hands. He shook his head slowly. 3 days ago, you couldn't pick a bedroom, Claire, and just now you called every move that man made before he made it. And Claire crossed the kitchen, and she didn't fold into him for comfort the way she had on the porch, and she didn't stand half a step back the way she'd learned to. She stood right in front of him, level eye to eye, and she said the thing that had been building in her for 3 days. I couldn't pick a bedroom because I'd spent 3 years being told I couldn't be trusted to pick anything. Her voice was steady and clear. But I could always read him. That was never the problem. I always knew exactly what he was. I just wasn't allowed to say it out loud even to myself. You didn't make me strong, Ethan. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. You didn't rescue me, and you didn't fix me, and you didn't make me into somebody new. She put a hand flat against his chest, not leaning, just resting there, a person making contact on her own terms. You just stood next to me and kept handing me things I could hold until I remembered I had hands. That's all. That's everything. But it was me holding them. It was always going to have to be me. Ethan looked down at her hand on his chest and up at her face, and he felt the thing he'd been refusing to say for 4 days rise all the way up, and he almost said it. And then he didn't, because he'd made himself a promise in the truck on the way up the mountain, and he wasn't going to break it 3 days later. Not even now, not even like this. I know it was you, he said instead gently. It was always you, and that's exactly why I'm not going to say the thing you can see I want to say. Not yet. He covered her hand with his just for a second, then stepped back. Because you just got free, Claire, today. This is day 4 of you being your own person for the first time in 3 years. And if I reach out right now and pull you into something with me, even something good, even something true, then some part of you is always going to wonder if you jumped straight from his cage into my arms because you were scared to be alone. He met her eyes. And I won't do that to you. I won't be the reason you never find out who you are on your own. You've got a story to finish, a life to build with your name on it. An apartment that's yours, a bank account that's yours, a whole self you haven't met yet. Claire's eyes were wet, but she was nodding because she understood, because it was the most loving thing anyone had ever said to her, and it was also a door held open instead of closed. "So we wait," she said. "We wait. Not forever. Just until you know, really know all the way down, that if you choose this, you're choosing it free. Not running to it. Choosing it." He almost smiled. "I've waited a year at a mailbox, Claire. I can wait a little longer for the version of this where you come to me standing all the way up." And Claire Bennett laughed wet and real and stepped back and wiped her eyes, and there was a whole new person standing in that kitchen, someone even she was only just meeting. "Okay," she said. "Then I'd better go build a life worth choosing you out of." 6 weeks later, the protective order came through uncontested. Because Patricia Vance had lined it all up, the 3 years of texts, the tract card, the porch, the CPS timeline, the social worker had all but gift-wrapped and laid it in front of Ryan Cole's own expensive lawyer. And Ryan Cole, who had built his entire life on the certainty that no one would ever line it all up, took one look at the case against him and did the thing that men like him always do when the dark finally has a light in it. He settled quietly. He signed. He agreed to stay away, agreed to release the account, agreed to everything fast and quiet. Because the one thing Ryan Cole could not survive was a courtroom where all of it got read out loud in front of the town that thought he'd built the fire station out of the goodness of his heart. He never faced her again. Men like that never do once the receipts come out. He simply silently disappeared from her life the same careful way he'd taken it over, and the town story about Claire Bennett quietly changed the way stories do once the person telling the loud version has something to hide. And Claire moved into a small apartment above a bookstore with a desk by the window and a bank account with only her name on it, and she hung the fixed chair's cousin she'd made her own start to finish in Ethan's shop over those weeks right by the door. And she did not call Ethan Miller, not for a while, because she had a life to build first, and a self to meet. And a promise made in a kitchen on the 4th day of her freedom, that when she finally walked back across that road, she'd be standing all the way up. 6 months went by, and Ethan Miller kept his word, and it was the hardest thing he'd done since he buried his wife. He didn't call her. He heard about her the way you hear about someone in a small town sideways in fragments secondhand. He heard she'd gotten a part-time job at the bookstore under her apartment. He heard she'd started a little writing group that met on Thursday nights. He heard from Denise, who heard it from Amy, that Claire Bennett had sold a short story to a literary magazine, a real one that paid actual money, and that at the little celebration her friends threw her, she'd cried and said she'd waited 11 years to be able to call herself a writer out loud. And every single time Ethan heard one of these things, some part of him wanted to get in the truck and drive the 15 minutes into town and knock on the door above the bookstore and say the thing he'd swallowed in that kitchen 6 months ago. And every single time he didn't. Because he'd told her he'd wait for the version where she came to him, standing all the way up, and a man who breaks that promise the first time it gets hard was never worth choosing in the first place. Lily made it harder. Lily asked about her constantly. "Is Miss Claire ever coming back?" "I don't know, buddy." "Did she stop liking us?" Ethan stopped what he was doing and crouched down to his daughter's level because some questions you don't answer standing up. "No, she didn't stop liking us. Miss Claire had to go learn how to take care of herself so that nobody could ever make her feel small again. And that takes a while, and you have to do it alone, or it doesn't count." He tucked a piece of hair behind Lily's ear. "It's like when you learn to ride your bike. Remember, you didn't want me holding on. You said, 'Let go, Daddy, or I'll never know if it was me.' Remember that." Lily nodded slowly. "Miss Claire's learning to ride her bike, and I promised her I'd let go so she could find out it was her." Lily considered this with her whole serious face. "But you're going to catch her if she falls, right?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby, if she ever falls. But I think Miss Claire's going to find out she doesn't fall anymore." That was a Tuesday. The knock came on a Saturday. It was 7:10 in the morning. Ethan would notice that later would turn it over in his mind for years, the symmetry of it. And he was in the workshop with a cup of coffee going cold on the bench, exactly the way he'd been 6 months and a lifetime ago, when there was a knock on the workshop door. Not a fist. Not the frantic hammering of a woman with a packed bag and no time. A knock. Ordinary, steady. 3 even raps from someone in no particular hurry, someone who knew she'd be answered. Ethan set down his coffee. He knew before he opened the door. He knew from the knock. 6 months ago, she'd pounded on that door like the building was on fire, like she had 30 minutes before she lost her nerve. This knock was the sound of a person who had all the nerve in the world. He opened it, and Claire Bennett was standing there. But she was different, and Ethan felt the difference before he could name it, the way you feel weather change. It wasn't the haircut, though. She'd cut it shorter, easier. It wasn't the clothes. It was the way she was standing. 6 months ago, on this exact spot, she'd stood with her shoulders curled in her chin, down, one hand pulling her sleeve over her wrist, a woman trying to take up less air. This woman stood square in his doorway, with her weight even on both feet, and her chin level, and her hands loose at her sides, taking up exactly as much room as she pleased, and not 1 inch less. "Hi?" Claire said. "Hi." For a second, neither of them said anything. 6 months of not calling stood in the doorway between them. "I finished it," she said finally. "Finished what?" "The story, the one about the woman who fixes the chair." She almost laughed. Except it kept getting longer. It turned into a whole collection, 9 stories. A publisher in Charlotte's putting it out in the spring, small press, tiny advance, nobody's getting rich. But it's got my name on the cover, Ethan. Claire Bennett. Just mine. Her voice caught just slightly. "I've got a copy of the galley in my bag. The dedication page, I wanted you to read the dedication page before it's printed in case you'd want me to change it. But that's not why I came." "Why'd you come?" And Claire took a breath, and Ethan watched her, not fold, watched her hold his eyes, watched her do the bravest thing he'd ever seen her do, which was tell the truth, standing all the way up. "6 months ago in your sister's kitchen, you told me you wouldn't say the thing you wanted to say. Because I'd just gotten free, and you didn't want to be the reason I never found out who I was on my own. You said you'd wait for the version of this where I came to you standing up. Not running to you. Choosing you." Her chin lifted a fraction. "So I went and I built a whole life. A real one. My own apartment. My own money, every dollar in that account is mine. I checked. I check all the time just because I can. My own work. My own friends. My own Thursday nights. I learned who I am when nobody's watching, and nobody's asking me what I spent, and nobody's telling me my dreams are cute." She swallowed. "And I found out something." "What did you find out?" "I found out I don't need you." She said it plainly, and it landed, and it wasn't cruel. It was the opposite of cruel. It was the whole point. I want to be really clear about that because it's the most important thing I've ever said to anybody. I built a life where I don't need you, where I don't need anyone, where if you'd moved to another state 6 months ago and I'd never seen you again, I'd have been okay. Not happy, but okay. Standing, on my own 2 feet. Her eyes were wet now, but her voice was rock steady. And that's exactly why I can do this next part. Because it's not the scared woman with the packed bag choosing the nearest safe place. It's a woman who doesn't need anybody standing on a life she built with her own hands telling you. She stopped. She reached out slowly, and she took his hand off the doorframe, and she held it in both of hers. That out of everything I could choose, I choose you. Not because I have to. Not because I'm scared to be alone. I'm not scared to be alone anymore. I found that out. That was the whole 6 months. I choose you because I want to. Because you're the man who kept handing me things I could hold until I remembered I had hands. Because you waited a year at a mailbox, and then 6 more months at a door, and you never once reached out and grabbed, not even when I'd have let you. Not even when it would have been so easy. Her voice broke finally, all the way. You're the only person I've ever met who wanted me to be free more than he wanted to have me. And I spent 32 years not knowing that kind of person existed. And now that I know, I'm not walking back across that road and pretending I don't. Ethan Miller stood in his workshop doorway and looked at this woman, and for a moment he could not speak at all. "Say something," Claire whispered. "You're allowed to say it now. The thing from the kitchen. If you still, I love you." He said it fast before she'd even finished, 6 months of it coming out all at once. "I've loved you since the bread. The first winter when you brought that loaf of bread over and stood on my porch and made small talk about the weather because you were too shy to just say hi, and then you left, and I stood there holding a warm loaf of bread like an idiot, and I thought, oh no, oh no. I have loved you since before I had any right to, and I kept my mouth shut for a year, and then I put you in a truck and drove you up a mountain, and I still kept it shut because you were somebody's, and then because you were nobody's for the first time and you needed to stay that way for a while." His own voice cracked. "Do you have any idea how hard the last 6 months were? Hearing about you secondhand, Lily asking about you every single day, wanting to drive into town every night and knowing that if I did, I'd be stealing the exact thing I was trying to give you. You could have—" "No, I couldn't. That's the whole point. That was the whole gift." He turned his hand over in hers, so he was holding her back. "If I'd shown up, you'd never have known for sure. You'd have wondered forever if you chose me, or if you just took the exit. I wanted you to have the clean version, the version where there's no doubt, the version where a free woman looks at her whole free life and picks me anyway." His eyes were wet now too. "And you just gave me that, standing on my doorstep at 7:10 in the morning exactly 6 months later. You gave me the clean version. 7:10. Claire laughed, wiping her face. "I didn't even—" "Same time you knocked the first day, to the minute. I noticed. I'll always notice." He shook his head, laughing too. 6 months to the minute, and the first time you knocked like the world was ending, and this time you knocked like you knew I'd answer. I did know you'd answer." She smiled through the tears. "That was the whole difference. 6 months ago, I knocked hoping. This morning, I knocked knowing. I'm never going back to hoping, Ethan. I built a whole life so I'd never have to hope for a man to answer a door again. And it turns out—" She squeezed his hand. "The funny thing about not needing someone is that it's the only way you get to actually love them. Because when you don't need them every single day, you stay is a day you chose. Nobody's trapped, nobody's rescued. You just wake up every morning and pick each other on purpose free." And that was when a small voice said from behind Ethan's legs, "Miss Claire." They both looked down. Lily had come out to the workshop in her pajamas drawn by the voices, and she was standing there staring up at Claire with her whole heart in her 6-year-old face. "You came back," Lily breathed. Claire crouched down, right down to the child's level, the way Ethan always did, and her voice was thick. "Yeah, baby, I came back. Are you staying this time? Or are you still learning your bike?" Claire's head came up, and she looked at Ethan confused, and Ethan mouthed later, and Claire looked back at Lily and said, "I finished learning my bike. I know how to ride it all by myself now, so I don't have to go anywhere ever again unless I want to." "Do you want to?" "No," Claire said, and it came out fierce and certain and final. "No, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay right here." And Lily Miller, who was 6 years old and had diagnosed Ryan Cole in one sentence, and who had told her father to let go of the bike so she'd know it was her, looked at Claire Bennett for a long, serious moment, and then she reached out and took Claire's hand, exactly the way she had 6 months ago, over a crayon dragon, and she said the thing that closed the whole circle. "Good. Because Daddy kept your mug." Claire looked up. "My mug, the blue one." Lily pointed into the shop. "The one you gave him. He wouldn't let me use it even when all the other cups were dirty. He said it was special. I asked him why, and he said because it fit his hand." Lily rolled her eyes, 6 going on 40. "But I think it's because it was yours." And Claire stood up slowly and walked past Ethan into the workshop, and there on the bench beside the coffee maker, exactly where she'd left it a year and a half ago, was the old blue coffee mug she'd given him one winter afternoon, back when they were only neighbors, back when the mailbox was the whole story. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hands, and her eyes filled all over again. "You kept it," she said quietly. 6 months I was gone, a year and a half since I gave it to you. You kept it right here." Ethan came and stood beside her. "I always liked the way it fit my hand." She looked at him, and she knew the way she'd known there was more behind that same answer once before, that he wasn't talking about the mug. "That's not why," she said softly. "No," Ethan admitted. "That's not why." "Then say why." And Ethan Miller looked at Claire Bennett, holding the blue mug in his workshop, with his daughter's hand in hers, and the morning light coming up over the road that ran between their two houses, and he said the truest thing he knew. "Because every morning for 6 months I poured my coffee into your mug, and for about 30 seconds it felt like you were still close. It was the one thing I let myself have. Everything else I gave up calling you, driving to you, saying your name to anyone who'd listen. But that mug I kept. Because a man's allowed one thing." His voice was rough. "I told you once up at the cabin, my grandfather used to say, a man's not free because of what he owns. He's free because of what he can walk away from. And I walked away from everything, Claire. For 6 months I walked away from you every single day on purpose, so you could go find out you were free." He took the mug from her hands and set it back down on the bench gently, and then he took both her hands in his. "But I never could walk away from that mug. So I guess it turns out there was one thing in the whole world I couldn't give up even to prove a point." Claire was crying and smiling at the same time. "You should have called me." "I know. 6 months, Ethan. I know. I'd have said yes at 3 months. I was ready at 3 months. I almost knocked at 3 months, and then I made myself wait because I wanted to be sure it was me and not the loneliness." "And are you sure now?" Claire pulled her hands free of his, and for one terrible second, Ethan thought he'd said something wrong, but she only pulled them free so she could put them flat against his chest, the way she had in the kitchen 6 months ago. A person making contact on her own terms, on her own 2 feet. Needing nothing, choosing everything. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. "And here's how I know. 6 months ago I couldn't have said this next part because it would have been a lie. But I can say it now." She looked up at him steady and clear and completely herself. "I don't need you, Ethan Miller. I will never need you. I built my whole life on not needing you, and I'm keeping it every bit of it. My apartment, my writing, my Thursday nights, my name on my own money. I'm not moving into your life. I'm not disappearing into your house the way I disappeared into his. I'm going to keep every single thing I built." Her voice dropped and got fierce and got tender all at once. "But I would like to spend the rest of my life choosing you every single morning on purpose freely because I want to, and not because I have to. If you'll spend the rest of yours doing the same. That's not a rescue. That's not a cage. That's not even a line. That's just 2 people who learned how to stand alone, deciding to stand next to each other." Ethan Miller reached up and covered her hands with his. "Yes," he said. "God, yes. 1,000 times yes." And Lily, standing beside them, watching the 2 grown-ups she loved most in the world hold on to each other and cry and laugh at the same time, did what 6-year-olds do, which is cut straight to the only question that matters. "Does this mean Miss Claire can use her own mug now?" And Ethan Miller laughed. Really laughed from all the way down, the way he hadn't laughed since before Sarah died, since before the grief and the routines and the careful, quiet life. And he picked up his daughter with one arm and pulled Claire in with the other. And the 3 of them stood there in the workshop where he fixed broken things in the ordinary morning light, and he said, "Yeah, baby, from now on it's her mug. She can use it any time she wants. She lives here now, or no." He looked at Claire and corrected himself because it mattered, because it was the whole point. "She doesn't live here. She lives above the bookstore in her own place with her own name on the door. But she's ours now, and we're hers. And she came back, not because she had to, but because out of the whole wide world and the whole free life she built, she looked around and picked us. They didn't get married right away. There was no rush, and neither of them had anything left to prove. Claire kept the apartment above the bookstore for another full year. Wrote 3 more stories there at the desk by the window, in the life that was only hers. And she'd walk across the road to Ethan's some evenings, and back to her own place some nights. And it drove the town crazy. Two grown people who so obviously belonged together, taking their own sweet time, and neither of them cared even a little because they'd both learned the same hard lesson from the same cruel teacher, which was that the fastest way to lose yourself is to move into somebody else's life before you're sure you've got one of your own. Ryan Cole moved away that spring. Nobody was quite sure where. The protective order held and he never so much as drove down their road again. And slowly, the town's memory rearranged itself the way small towns do, until the man who'd built the fire station became the man there'd always been. Something a little off about, and the unstable woman who'd run off with the widower became the local author whose book was in the bookstore window, and the story flipped completely the way stories do once the person who was shouting the loudest has left the room. Claire never gloated about it. She never had to. She'd learned that the truth doesn't need to win the argument. It just needs to outlast the liar. And she'd outweighted Ryan Cole the way she'd outweighted her own fear one honest day at a time. The galley she'd brought in her bag that morning, Ethan read it that night after Lily was asleep sitting in his workshop with the blue mug beside him. He turned to the dedication page, and Claire had written in the small, careful print of a woman who'd chosen every word for E, who never once tried to fix me and taught me I was never broken. You didn't hand me a life. You handed me back my hands. Ethan read it 4 times. Then he closed the galley and he set it down. And he sat there in the quiet with the blue mug for a long while. And he thought about the morning it all started, the fist on the door, the packed bag, the woman with the sleeve pulled down over her wrist saying, "Give me 30 minutes," trying for the first time in years to choose one single thing for herself. He thought about the mountain and the black SUV and the porch where she'd stood all the way up for the very first time. He thought about the kitchen table full of screenshots at 2 in the morning, and the CPS worker at the door, and the 6 long months of not calling, of pouring his coffee into her mug, and letting her go every single day on purpose. And he understood finally and completely the thing he'd been circling since the very beginning, back when he thought wood was easier to fix than people. He'd been wrong about that. You can't fix a person. He knew that now. He'd tried to teach himself that whole first year that the safest thing was to stay in his shop and keep the world at arm's length and never reach across the road. But it turned out the bravest thing a person can do isn't to fix somebody who's broken. It's to stand next to somebody who isn't broken at all, who's only ever been trapped and tired and told 1,000 times that she couldn't be trusted to hold her own life, and to keep quiet and keep steady, and keep handing her things she can hold and wait however long it takes, without ever once grabbing until she remembers she had hands the whole time. The greatest love stories don't begin when someone rescues you. They begin the day someone loves you enough to let you rescue yourself, and then chooses you free and whole, and needing nothing every single morning after. Claire Bennett walked back across that road for the last time on a Saturday in the fall, carrying 1 box and her own blue mug, and her name on the cover of a book. And she never once looked back at the house she'd escaped because she wasn't running from anything anymore. She was just finally home, and this time she'd built it herself.